Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of Genesis of the Daleks, a story portraying the origins of the Daleks and their creation, as well as the introduction of their creator, Davros. Please be aware there are potential spoilers ahead, but don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted for more content. Following on from their previous adventure, the Centauran experiment, the Doctor, Sarah and Harry are en route back to the Nerva space station when their transmat is intercepted by the Time Lords, who bring them to the Daleks' home planet of Skaro before their creation and task the Doctor with the prevention of the Daleks or to discover any inherent weaknesses. Given that this was Tom Baker's fourth appearance as the Doctor and the fifth one filmed in production order, he is still establishing the characteristics of the Fourth Doctor, as he does in the whole of the first season. The Fourth Doctor we come to recognise didn't really come to fruition until his second season, and as such he plays the Doctor a lot more straight than he would in subsequent seasons. You do start to see glimmers of this though during his interaction with General Raven in episode 1, where he mocks him for being a particularly young general, and later, when he and Harry trick Raven into the lead up to their attempted escape, he jokingly compares him to Alexander the Great. Other than that, this is a Fourth Doctor with a lot less tomfoolery and more serious and even at times dejected, especially when he thinks he has led Sarah and Harry to their deaths. However, this is as much a credit to the acting prowess of Tom Baker, who was more than capable in playing the Doctor in a variety of personas, and due to his gravitas, was able to elevate some of his weaker stories through his performance. Genesis of the Daleks isn't one of those weaker stories though, but is one of his finest acting performances in the role. Stories of 6 or more episodes usually give the companions more breathing space and more to do if there is more than one of them. Sarah, by now, had been in the show for nearly 2 seasons and was fully established, and as such is given more independence during the story. She shows her heroics, having been separated from the Doctor and Harry in the first episode by leading a revolt with the Mutos and Khalid prisoners to sabotage the Thal rocket, which is almost her own separate adventure for the first half of the story. This is very typical of the Sarah Jane Smith character, someone who is absolutely devoted to the Doctor, but at the same time very much independent and inquisitive, given her journalistic background. In the process, she makes friends and earns trust, in particular with Severin, the Muto, who helps her lead the attempted escape from the Thals, before later joining up with the resistance group to take down the Daleks. Harry Sullivan is a character I sympathise for. He has great attributes for a companion with his bravery and intelligence, and gets an opportunity to show these skills off in this story, whether it be saving the Doctor from blowing himself up with a landmine, overwhelming armed guards, or being able to rig up explosives. Unfortunately, the character isn't given the independence Sarah does, and is always with another protagonist throughout the story, mainly the Doctor or Sarah. As mentioned before, Sarah was the established companion by now, and there wasn't enough opportunity to give Harry the same degree of independence. Additionally, the original concept of the Fourth Doctor was meant to be an older person, more in the mould of William Hartnell, and had that been the case, Harry would have been the companion to handle the physical aspects of the story, as Ian Chesterton and Stephen Taylor did throughout the First Doctor's tenure. As such, Tom Baker was a lot younger than the original conception, and was more than capable of handling the physical aspects seen in Doctor Who, as we would see through the years. This is unfortunate for the character of Harry, and in the long run he became redundant, and as such written out of the show, but for understandable reasons. This shouldn't take anything from Ian Marter, who portrayed Harry, as I thought he did a great job with the role. This is one of his stronger performances during his time in Doctor Who, but in my opinion, his best was yet to come. This story serves as an introduction to Davros, the creator of the Daleks. Daleks might be mentioned in the title of the story, but really, Davros is the primary antagonist here, given its nature and the purpose it serves. A mad scientist who holds great influence amongst the Khalid civilization and created the Daleks, or as they originally called the Mark III travel machine, as a means to house evolved genetically mutated Carlids. However, we all know how that turned out. Given that the Daleks' persona and beliefs were inspired by the Nazi movement, it is perhaps fitting that Davros is partly inspired by the real-life cruel Nazi scientist Josef Mengele, who is known for his experimentations on prisoners in concentration camps such as Auschwitz. There is a certain amount of mutual respect between the Doctor and Davros, much the same manner as the Doctor and the Master. Yes, they are adversaries, but are respectful and wary of the threat the other carries. Having said that, Davros is a megalomaniac who will let nothing get in the way of his creations. Additionally, he develops a god complex that began with him designing the Daleks partly in his image, although part of that could be budget related. His wheelchair casing is the same as the lower casing of a Dalek. He is reliant on an eye stalk instead of his own natural eyesight, and his voice is electronically modulated like the Daleks. In future stories, Davros would become Dalek Emperor, as well as referring himself as their father and his children. Davros was played here by regular guest actor Michael Wisher, who had previously appeared in The Ambassadors of Death in 1970, Terror of the Autons in 1971, and Carnival of Monsters in 1973, as well as providing Dalek voices in Frontier in Space, Planet of the Daleks, and Death to the Daleks, and this is down partly due to vocal abilities that he was selected to play Davros. Given that the character is confined to a wheelchair and Michael Wisher was covered up in prosthetics, a lot of his performance has to come from his vocal range to convey Davros's treacherous, mania-like persona. Michael Wisher actually delved into realms of method acting to get into character of Davros, with the story going that during rehearsals he did his lines whilst having a paper bag over his head, so that his vocals would become the primary focus of his performance. Although Michael Wisher would appear 2 more times in Doctor Who, in Revenge of the Cybermen and Planet of Evil, both from 1975, he would never play Davros on screen again, and in subsequent stories, the character would be played by David Goodison in Destiny of the Daleks, Terry Malloy throughout the 1980s, and Julian Bleach since the character's return in 2009. Nyder is the sadistic, faithful right-hand man to Davros, who rarely leaves his side. Like his superior, he is treacherous and deceitful, and fully buys into Davros's Dalek project. It is one thing assisting in the annihilation of the Thals, but it is another not caring about the extermination of his fellow comrades, and with Davros portraying his own race. The character is virtually deadpan in facial expression, but at times he shows a wry smile full of sadism as he witnesses people getting executed in front of him. Peter Miles, who like Michael Wisher had already appeared in Doctor Who previously, deserves a lot of credit for a character who could have easily been a primary antagonist in another story. The Daleks are portrayed in this story in a manner that they have never really been presented before. They aren't the primary antagonist. They appear fleetingly in the first half of the story, initially as remote control and demonstrations by Davros. The second half of the story they are more or less their usual destructive selves and offer a twist towards the end of the story. Overall, they are used sparingly and with limited dialogue. But this is necessary, given that this is an origin story, and that these are the first Daleks that are basic and have no understanding of the rest of the universe, and as such, their creation, rather than the Daleks themselves, are the focal point of the story, which is why I call Davros more the main antagonist. Now, before we get to the writing and genesis of the Daleks, I feel the need to delve into the past a bit first. Terry Nation is one of the best writers to have graced Doctor Who, but there are better. He invented the Daleks, the Doctor's most famous adversaries, and they are a brilliant concept of ultimate evil. But he didn't exactly maintain the consistency and variety of other great writers of that era. By 1966, he had written 3 Dalek stories solo: The Daleks, The Dalek Invasion of Earth, and The Chase. He co-wrote the 12-episode epic The Dalek Master Plan, and one non-Dalek story, The Keys of Marinus. However, having had some success with the Doctor Who films starring Peter Cushing, which were based on 2 of the televised stories, he had plans to take the Daleks stateside for their own films, which didn't work out in the end, but as such moved away from writing for Doctor Who for the next 7 years, with Patrick Troughton's 2 Dalek stories, The Power of the Daleks and The Evil of the Daleks, written by former script editor David Whittaker, and their first colorised story, John Pertwee's Day of the Daleks, written by Louis Marks. Dalek stories were always considered a ratings winner in Doctor Who, and in 1973 he wrote Planet of the Daleks and Death to the Daleks the following year. Now, although they were ratings winners, they aren't necessarily considered the finest Dalek stories. Planet of the Daleks was virtually a rewrite of their debut story back in 1963, and Death to the Daleks didn't actually originally feature the Daleks themselves, and as such made them a shadow of their menacing former selves when they were pigeonholed into the story. This was recognised by then producer Barry Letts. When Nation submitted another Dalek story, it was rejected on the grounds of it being too similar, and Letts challenged Nation to write something new about the show's most recognisable antagonist. This is what became Genesis of the Daleks, which was picked up by the new team of producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes for one of the 4th Doctor's stories in his debut season. The concept was an origin story, something we've all heard of in today's TV and film production, but almost unheard of in 1970s British TV. As such, the stripped-back elements of the Daleks' hatred for all things non-Dalek are used as one of the themes, and expanded to the origins of the Khalid race, who, at the time, were only aware of life on Skaro and nowhere else. This also delves into the ideology of fascism and the Nazi movement, which were an original basis for Terry Nation's initial concept of the Daleks back in '63, due to his fear of growing up during World War II. The concept of fascism and Nazism is extended to the Khalids, also through their uniform and hatred of the Thals. As witnessed from the first scene, this is a story set in the midst of a war that has gone on for so long, neither side could probably remember why it started. From the ideologies of the Khalids that was passed on to the Daleks, you would expect the Thals to be the Allied-like good guys and wanting peace, as they were portrayed back in 1963. But here, they are just as full of hate as the Khalids, and as such, were the ones to seemingly commit genocide when they seemingly virtually wiped out the Khalids with a missile attack. But on both sides there are examples of characters with conscience, such as Garman for the Khalids and Betan for the Thals. This serves as a timely reminder that war isn't necessarily about good versus evil, but a difference in ideologies. There are 2 great pieces of dialogue in this story that have since gone down as some of the show's most iconic moments. Firstly, in episode 5, where the Doctor and Davros have a debate as scientists regarding control of a virus. It is interesting as it begins with the invitation from Davros just after torturing Sarah and Harry to talk science after gaining knowledge from the Doctor about the future of the Daleks. He comes across as inviting, but in reality he's trying to get more from the Doctor by means other than torture to make the Daleks more formidable. The Doctor in turn foresees this and uses the virus hypothesis to Davros to get a measure of his megalomania and true intentions. The conversation is played out like a game of chess, with both the Doctor and Davros trying to trick and trap the other into getting what they really want to know from each other. In short, it could be argued that the virus hypothesis the Doctor put towards Davros actually steered him into making the Daleks more ruthless than he initially intended to, and as such, we are left with the Daleks that we, as viewers, have come to have known. You then have the "Do I have the right?" speech made by the Doctor in episode 6. The Doctor, there and then, has the golden chance of eradicating the Daleks from history and stop them from even existing, and to remove the ultimate evil from the universe. But it is conscience that stands in the way and prevents him from doing it by realising that he would have been committing genocide and would be no better than the Daleks. This is one of those pieces of dialogue that sums up the Doctor as a character. He will fight for what is right and against evil, but only to an extent where he doesn't become as guilty as those he is against. The Doctor isn't willing to become the villain and sees the greater good in the Daleks' existence, having already witnessed civilizations and species come at peace with one another to fight against the Daleks. This is a representation of things only being able to exist with the presence of their opposite. David Maloney, at the time, was one of the most experienced directors on the roster, having plied his trade as a production assistant during William Hartnell's era, before getting his opportunity at directing in Patrick Troughton's final season. He was one of the directors entrusted with the lengthier, more epic stage stories, such as the 10-part Second Doctor swan song, The War Games, so you can understand why Philip Hinchcliffe gave him the task of directing Genesis of the Daleks. He also wasn't afraid to up the tone of violence in Doctor Who, in particular during Tom Baker's period, to the point where in Genesis of the Daleks he rewrote the opening scene to convey a more warlike feel to the story. He also introduced the art of freeze-frame episode ending for increased drama, as witnessed at the end of episode 2 when Sarah is sent plummeting from some scaffolding. He would later repeat this technique in the 1976 story The Deadly Assassin, in which he and the production team fell under criticism from Mary Whitehouse. David Spood's set design is largely basic throughout the story. The Carly bunker, where the majority of the story is set, is of a metallic floor and walls appearance of the corridors and rooms. This would have brought the cost down and allowed the production team to use the same sets for different purposes, albeit using different camera angles, lighting and furniture. The Farl bunker is largely the same approach to design, with the exception of using a pale yellow colour and being more brightly lit. The trenches are a mix of studio shots and location filming at Betchworth Quarry in Surrey, which was reused for The Deadly Assassin. On the whole, basic, but effective and cleverly used. The costume designs drew largely from military uniform, with Thals wearing green-coloured uniforms and the Carlids wearing black SS-style uniforms complete with jackboots, extending the comparisons of Carlids and Daleks to Nazis. The Mutos' appearance is basic, consisting of rags to convey their scavenger-like existence. John Friedlander should take a lot of credit on his use of prosthetics for the appearance of Davros, allowing more freedom of mouth movement for Michael Wisher, having used similar techniques in Frontier of Space with the Draconians and Death to the Daleks with the Exelons. Genesis of the Daleks was originally broadcast as 6 episodes from the 8th of March to the 12th of April 1975 as the penultimate story to Tom Baker's first season as the Doctor. The 4th Doctor would battle the Daleks only one more time in 1979's Destiny of the Daleks, and this set a trend for the Daleks to be used sparingly in the series as a form of their preservation. Genesis of the Daleks is a pivotal story in Doctor Who, not just for the Daleks themselves, but the story as a whole. Virtually every Dalek story up to the present day is influenced by this episode. For the remainder of the classic series, they were predominantly soldiers of Davros in some shape or form, as he also featured in every Dalek story from here on in the classic series. When the show was revived in 2005, Russell T Davies admitted to using the events of the Genesis of the Daleks for the basis of the Time War, in that due to the Doctor's interventions of their Genesis, they as such became aware of life beyond their own planet and the power possessed by the Time Lords. The Daleks now have a fully developed mythology, history and culture due to this story, which would be seen in later stories when it became less of the Daleks against innocent victims, but the Daleks in midst of power struggles, either with other races such as the Mavellans, who were introduced in the story Destiny of the Daleks, or with each other, as seen in a multitude of stories in both the classic and new series. The whole idea of having a right on eradicating the Daleks from history came about full circle in the 12th Doctor story, The Magician's Apprentice, in 2015, when the Doctor is once again presented with the opportunity of preventing the creation of the Daleks by not rescuing Davros as a child. However, like in Genesis of the Daleks, he passes up on the opportunity based on morality. I originally bought this story on VHS due to having just got interested in Doctor Who and wanted to see a Dalek story. Little did I know at the time I had picked a story that wasn't so much a pure Dalek story, but an origin story, and as such I realised the Daleks as much more than the overused antagonists that they had threatened to become before this story's original broadcast. You could say that because of this story, the Daleks had rediscovered their mojo, as well as being introduced to an adversary more evil than the Daleks themselves, Davros. This story rightly deserves its place as arguably not perhaps the best ever Dalek story, but possibly the Fourth Doctor's finest story, and possibly the greatest Doctor Who story of all time. I would recommend this story for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, as an introduction to the Fourth Doctor, given that it's only his fourth adventure. Secondly, as an introduction to the Daleks, and more importantly their origins, because after all, if you're a fan of Doctor Who, you're already going to be familiar with the Daleks anyway. And thirdly, as an introduction to Davros, who over the course of the series, up to the present day, has become more ambitious and more hell-bent on destruction than is presented here. So, that concludes my review on Genesis of the Daleks. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments below if you think differently to my review. Be sure to tune in for my next review, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.